ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Campfire Catholicism. I am your host, Elton Jarvis. So glad to have you guys listening to this show today, or whatever day you are listening to this, okay? So, the snow is melting. The snow and the ice is melting over here in Fort McMurray, Alberta, Canada, and that is so exciting. And I wish it could just always melt because I'm getting sick and tired of winter. I don't have like a strong dislike or a hatred for winter. Obviously, wintertime, you have, Christmas and the Christmas season. So how can you not? How can you hate that? I guess you could say. But yeah, I am really in need for the snow to melt. Well, I'm not in need of it. I don't need it, but I want it because I really want to play basketball outside and I really want to do some active stuff. Not that you can't do anything active outside in the wintertime, but after staring outside out of my window and seeing the snow and it's just white everywhere, it gets really bland after a while, and so I am wanting to look at the greenery outside, and yeah, let's put it that way. Today, in adventuring into Tolkienverse, this is going to be episode 3. We are going to be talking about evil and what Tolkien had to say about evil. So this is a very, very interesting topic. And so there are usually 2 ways in which we can react to evil, okay? And I will just do my best to simplify to the best of my ability just what those 2 ways are. The first being that we can be in denial or in ignorance of evil. And so there's a quote from Kevin Spacey as the narrator, Verbal-Kint in Usual Suspects. And this is what the quote is. And I'm sure a lot of people know this quote. It's a pretty popular quote. They just don't know where it's from. But this is what the quote is. The greatest trick the devil ever... can't even talk. Okay. The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was that he does not exist. I'll read that one more time. The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was that he does not exist. There's a certain sense of spiritual pacifism when we hold to this worldview, and how someone can just be in denial of the side of spiritual warfare. Well, certainly if you are a materialist and deny aspects of the supernatural, there is no need to even consider spiritual warfare. And if you're also a naturalist, you wouldn't believe in anything of the supernatural. So that's the first worldview that we can have, is we can be in denial of evil. And if you are in denial of evil, we're in denial of temptation, we're in denial of, in a sense, sin. Everything can just be strictly emotional impulses or chemical responses to the brain. Now, the second worldview would be that of viewing evil with a sense of fear. And I don't mean being afraid of it like being afraid of, say, getting bitten by a rabid dog. Actually, that would be very scary, and if any of you guys have been bitten by a rabid dog, you should go to the hospital. What I mean by fear is that looking upon evil with a sense that it is of the same power and authority of good, as if evil is a second god, as Shiva the Destroyer is equal to Vishnu in Hindu theology. We can really fall into the idea of what's called dualism, in the sense that evil and good are on the same playing field with each other, which in reality, they're not. Now, the nature and problem of evil is one that we are going to be faced with our entire lives. And our ancestors certainly didn't live their lives far away from evil at all. In fact, we only need to look back even, what would that be now? Probably about 100 years, just 100 years ago. And we can even see great evils that have happened. For example, we had the rise of communism in Russia and in those places, under Joseph Stalin, and we saw millions of people die there. Well, I didn't, but I would like to think that my ancestors did. And there were also, we only need to go back to World War II, and we only need to look at Auschwitz and the other concentration camps that were in Germany, and how many millions of Jews were killed in the Holocaust under Adolf Hitler. And you can even search the images of the bodies and the victims of the Holocaust if you even just type it in on Google. I mean, you can't help when you look at those images, but feel how evil is so destructive. And it seems that evil acts really do project a lot of noise, like one tree being cut down in a forest. Once it hits the ground, you hear a large thud. The reality is there are evil things that are still happening today. I mean, we live in the nature of good versus evil all the time. I mean, there are a few evils that I could even comment on, one being abortion. I mean, abortion is, and I can understand we can get very compassionate in regards to viewing the circumstances as to why there are abortions, but really it is what's called, a lot of people have been calling it this, it is the modern day Holocaust, and the victims are no longer, in a sense, the adult Jews, but the victims are those of the unborn children. In fact, millions of them are killed every year. I don't remember the exact statistic, but yeah, we live in a world where there's good versus evil all the time, and I'm sure we're going to explore more topics on other evil acts that we can certainly comment on, but we're just going to talk about the nature of evil and where we can find the nature of evil in the universe of Tolkienverse. Because these acts that I've just mentioned, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to come to a conclusion that evil is real and that it does exist. Not only do we have evil atrocities in the real world, but every great story has in the core of its context being a struggle between good and evil. And we can just even go through the movies that have gotten a lot of views. And for example, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we have the Avengers versus Thanos in Avengers Infinity War and in Avengers Endgame. I really like what they did in Infinity War and how they tried to get the viewer to empathize and put themselves in Thanos' shoes, as if they wanted you to see him as if he is the victim, and he's sort of rationalizing his insanity in regards to the evil acts that he is committing and the atrocities. But then in Avengers Endgame, they totally flip the script, and he comes to the conclusion of just wiping everybody out anyways and creating a universe born out of blood. It's just crazy. And I like that because what we do as people when we do something wrong, I think initially we deny it. And then if other people are involved, we can fall into even scapegoating other people. And that's just the attributes to us operating in a fallen nature. But if it was something that you have instigated on your own accord, it doesn't take long until you, in your consciousness, you start to justify it. And that's very synonymous to say the serpent back in Genesis with Adam and Eve. Did God really say this? Did God really say that you should do this? That's the same thing we end up doing all the time when we try to justify any of those things. But the nature of evil, again, it's not equal to good. And Tolkien does a marvelous job at portraying this, even though it seems that in times, especially where there is much dramatic tension in the books, evil not only appears equal to good, but it actually appears to be stronger than good. A lot of good movies also do this, and a lot of good books do this. I mean, it's so archetypal because you even look in scripture. For example, one good clash of good versus evil that we have in the Old Testament is David versus Goliath. You have David, who is a puny, small, little shepherd boy, versus Goliath, who is, gosh, I don't even remember how tall he is. I can't remember the number, but he's really, really tall. He's taller than Yao Ming, let's put it that way. And he has a huge spear and a shield, and all your money is put on Goliath. But in reality, I mean, yeah, we can look from the outside in and say that it's a fixed fight because David's going to win. Now, this is what Gandalf the White says in the Two Towers when he's talking about himself, and he even talks about evil. This is what he says: I am Gandalf, Gandalf the White, but black is mightier still. In the philosophy of Tolkien, Peter Kreeft highlights something that Tolkien was getting across in The Lord of the Rings. What evil always inevitably ends up doing. Evil is self-destructing. In fact, the nature of evil is to always self-destruct. It's not even if it's going to self-destruct. It is inevitable that evil is going to self-destruct. I just picture Thanos off the top of my head. I am inevitable. And that's like with evil. Like evil's inevitability is it always self-destructs. Anyways, why is that the case? Because evil is nothing without the presence of good. Evil is always a parasite off of good. And I'm going to give us some examples. Sauron in The Lord of the Rings was once a Mire, a lesser angel. Sauron's master Morgoth was once Melkor. Sauron was the head of Gandalf's wizards, the Astari. The orcs were once elves, and Gollum was once a hobbit. Finally, to put it in real context, Satan, known as the devil, was once Lucifer, which literally translates to light bearer. He was one of the seraphim who get to attend to God directly, yet he also still fell. So evil is a parasite upon good, and it self-destructs. Why? Because whenever a parasite succeeds in killing its host, it leads to its own death. So Peter Kreeft, again, he beautifully writes that in the philosophy of Tolkien and how evil is always a parasite, and it's always going to self-destruct. And this kind of brings into the next topic. It's always incredible to internalize what it means when God allows evil and human sin in order to bring about greater goods and to prevent future evils. So evil isn't equal than good. However, it is equally real as it is prominent not only in story, but in evil acts that we do witness in the real world. Evil doesn't only exist externally, but internally in every human heart. And Tolkien does a good job at showing this as well in the hearts of the Fellowship. One character that comes to mind is Boromir, who I think is the most underrated character in The Lord of the Rings. And he is certainly in my top 5 list for favorite characters in The Lord of the Rings. I mean, he's just a great guy. I might even do a podcast episode where me and another individual will rate about our favorite characters on a tier list or something in regards to The Lord of the Rings. How powerful is evil? Evil is pretty powerful. Going back to Gandalf's quote earlier, it says a lot about the power of evil. Evil is immortal, and I say that because Satan, the devil, is an immortal creature. And the demons were also immortal creatures as well, or they are immortal creatures. There is but one man that bruised evil's head, that being Christ Jesus, and he was bruised at the heel. Now, we teach that in our Catholic faith that God created, again, the heavens and the earth. And, again, that of the heavens, we learned the other day that we learned in the past episode that God created the angels, and he created them good, and God only creates things that are good. And so the angels were created good, and the only reason why the angels are good is because the grace that God gives them, that of being good. Now, I believe it was St. Thomas Aquinas that contemplated this, and he theorized this because we could think, well, how did the angels fall? Or how did Lucifer, at the time, again, he was a seraphim, one of God's attendees in his throne, how did he fall from grace? Well, I guess this is what he said. This is what he contemplated. They knew, again, so like we see knowledge like A, B, C, and D, but they just intuitively see. They have much more knowledge than we do, and the fact that they just are able to go from like step 1 to step 12, and they know every other step in a sense. It's really hard to explain the intuitive knowledge of angels, and it makes sense because they're supernatural, whereas we are natural. But they knew that they were good, and it was because of the gift of grace that God has given them that has made them good. And so the devil and the demons, they rejected that gift, rejected that grace, theorized, and I guess you could theorize that they wanted to be good out of their own works. not out of the free gift of grace that God has given him, and that is why they fell. And so a common way of putting it is the devil and the fallen angels were the first ever Pelagianists that ever existed. A Pelagianist being that, I am good because of my works and not out of the free gift of grace that God has given me. So we know that Lucifer and the fallen angels, they fell from heaven. And obviously we know Lucifer to be Satan, which means the accuser. Now, this fall of grace, or this fall from grace, is actually shown in the Silmarillion. And I'm actually going to read how it is shown. Okay, so let's take a look at this. This is what it says. But now Iluvatar sat and hearkened, and for a great while it seemed good to him. Again, this is talking about the Ainur singing to Iluvatar. For in the music there were no flaws. But as the theme progressed, it came into the heart of Melkor to interweave matters of his own, imagining that were not in accord with the theme of Iluvatar. For he sought therein to increase the power and glory of the part assigned to himself. To Melkor, among the Ainur had been given the greatest gifts of power and knowledge, and he had a share in all the gifts of his brethren. He had gone often alone into the void places, seeking the imperishable flame, for desire grew hot within him to bring into being things of his own, and it seemed to him that Iluvatar took no thought for the void, and he was impatient of its emptiness. Yet he found not the fire, for it was with Iluvatar. But being alone, he had begun to conceive thoughts of his own, unlike those of his brethren. I'm just going to stop there, but I'll continue reading afterwards. This can be us. Whenever we sin, which basically sin is, God, I don't want what you want. I want what I want. We end up getting very, very impatient with God, and we start to conceive things of our own. It's like we go into the void, seeking to fill ourselves up, seeking to find that flame imperishable, not realizing that the flame imperishable is with God, Eru Iluvatar. Everything, while we are with God, everything that we have is his. But no, we don't realize that, so we try to fill ourselves out of our own works. Whether that's sex, drugs, money, we try to fill ourselves up. But it's never enough. The void's emptiness could mean even our own emptiness without God. All right, so I'm going to continue reading. Some of these thoughts he now wove into his music, and straightway discord arose about him, and many that sang nigh him grew despondent, and their thought was disturbed, and their music faltered, but some began to attune their music to his, rather than to the thought which they had at first. Then the discord of Melkor spread ever wider, and the melodies which had been heard before foundered in a sea of turbulent sound. But Iluvatar sat and hearkened until it seemed that about his throne there was a raging storm. So Eru Iluvatar is witnessing all of this, and in a way he's kind of allowing it to happen, and we'll see. As of dark waters that made war upon another in an endless wrath that would not be assuaged. Then Iluvatar arose, and the Ainur perceived that he smiled, and he lifted up his left hand, and a new theme began amid the storm, like and yet unlike to the former theme, and it had gathered power and had new beauty. I'm going to read that one more time. Then Iluvatar arose, and the Ainur perceived that he smiled, and he lifted up his left hand, and a new theme began amid the storm, like and yet unlike to the former theme, and it gathered power and had a new beauty. This is where we see an example of how God allows evil to exist in order to bring about greater goods. We see that Melkor has twisted the theme into his own, and some of the Ainur that are singing choose Melkor's tune than Eru Iluvatar's tune, and those Ainur that choose that, they eventually become the Balrogs, But we see Eru Iluvatar. He rises from his throne and he lifts up his left hand, and a new theme begins, using the discord that Melkor sung. Eru Iluvatar twists it, and he brings about a new melody, a new harmony from the discord. That's just like what God does with evil. He allows it to exist, but he brings greater good out of it. Always. And so we read later on that Melkor does this 2 more times. He meets the other theme. So this is what it reads. But the discord of Melkor rose in uproar and contended with it. And again there was a war of sound more violent than before, until many of the Ainur were dismayed and sang no longer, and Melkor had the mastery. This can also be synonymous to us. Evil will always try to contend with good. That's just the nature of evil, even in our own lives. And it can seem that evil is so powerful or so mighty that it leaves us kind of like what the Ainur are like in this sentence. They get dismayed and they sing no longer. In the presence of evil, sometimes we lose our heart of worship and we no longer sing. Then I'm going to read the next part. Then again, Iluvatar arose, and the Ainur perceived that his countenance was stern, and he lifted up his right hand, and behold, a 3rd theme grew amid the confusion, and it was unlike the others. And this is what the theme sounds like. For it seemed at first soft and sweet, a mere rippling of gentle sounds and delicate melodies, but it could not be quenched, and it took to itself power and profundity. And it seemed at last that there were 2 musics progressing at one time before the seat of Iluvatar, and they were utterly at variance. And this is the description of Eru Iluvatar's theme versus Melkor's theme. So let's take a look at this. So Eru Iluvatar's theme is that of deep, wide, and beautiful, but slow and blended with an immeasurable sorrow. God wills all people to follow him and to know him and to be in union with him. And we see that Melkor and some of the Ainur are starting to they're starting to separate themselves from him. And so that's where we get this immeasurable sorrow from. Eru Iluvatar's that 2nd theme, deep, wide, and beautiful, but slow and blended with an immeasurable sorrow. Because God doesn't will anybody to be far apart from him. You could almost seem as if Eru Iluvatar is, I guess, trying to win over Melkor, and he's even trying to win over these Ainur, these angels that are separating themselves from him. And it kind of gives me, when I try to look at it in the form of scripture, it's like Hosea. It's like, come back to me. Come back to me with all your heart. Melkor's music, on the other hand, is said to have been loud and vain and endlessly repeated, and it essayed to drown the other musics by the violence of its voice. When we think, when we sin, I want what you want, or I want what I want, not what you want, God, we end up becoming loud and vain. It's another sense of pride. It's pride. And I love how it's described. It's loud and vain and endlessly repeated, because pride is also endlessly repeated in our hearts. When we are vain and we are prideful, it's all about me, 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 me. It's not about anybody else. And it drowns out everybody around us, just like how Melkor's theme drowns out the other music by the violence of it. But despite Melkor's best efforts to mar and utterly overthrow the great music of Iluvatar, his discordant music, the most triumphant notes of his music, were taken by Iluvatar and woven again. Again, we see that Eru Iluvatar, the god character, always brings about greater good out of Melkor's peace, over Melkor's quarrel peace. And I'm going to finish off the first part to this episode. I'm probably going to have to split this into 2 parts. We're going to finish off by the last great music, or the last theme that Eru Iluvatar approaches or does. So, Melkor still corrupts the second theme. Iluvatar then proposes a third theme. In the midst of this strife, whereat the halls of Iluvatar shook, and a tremor ran out into the silences yet unmoved, Iluvatar arose a third time, and his face was terrible to behold. Then he raised up both his hands, and in one chord, deeper than the abyss, higher than the firmament, piercing as the light of the eye of Iluvatar, the music ceased. So we see that eventually Iluvatar rises a third time, and his face terrible to behold. It's because that our God is not a nice God, but he's a good God. He's a God that is all-powerful, all-knowing, and he's always good. And we should be wholly fearful of him, and we shouldn't disappoint him because we love him. He raises up both his hands, and in one chord, deeper than the abyss, higher than the firmament. That implies that it's immeasurable. Piercing as the light of the Iluvatar, the music ceased. It seems like, and when Tolkien writes this, it's as if it's instantaneous, you know? And this is kind of even like a precursor to even what we teach in the faith. There will come a time where eventually God has already had victory over evil. But evil, like as we read in the book of Revelation, is going to be chained up, you know, and then there's going to be the New Jerusalem. Not only to mention, we can look at it in ourselves, you know, if we stay in God's friendship and live by his commandments, and when we get to heaven, there is no evil in heaven. That is the true victory. That is the true victory over evil, is that we are purified and that we get to heaven. Now, since we are running out of time, we are going to talk more about the nature of evil more in the next episode, and even further into the nature of suffering and how God can bring greater goods out of suffering. I really do hope that you loved listening to this episode. And again, the reason why I talked about Melkor and the great music and the discord is Melkor is obviously very synonymous with Satan and Satan's fall from grace. And so Melkor even has a fall from grace here in the Silmarillion. So hope you guys enjoy this episode. You have been listening to Campfire Catholicism. Be sure to follow the Facebook page and follow the Instagram page to get caught up on all of the content. Hope you guys have a great day. Take care. And continue doing some reading and some literature. I have no idea what I'm saying. I'm rambling. Okay, take care, guys. Have a great day.